I was standing in my bedroom in Charlotte, North Carolina, on a Tuesday morning in March when I found the key that would change everything I thought I knew about my late wife's family. My name is Thomas Edward Williams. I'm 64 years old, and I've been a financial advisor at Wells Fargo for 38 years before I retired last year. 8 months ago, my wife Dorothy passed away from pancreatic cancer. She was 62. We'd been married for 41 years, and I thought I knew everything about her. I was wrong. The key was small brass, tucked between the pages of Psalms in her Bible. The worn leather Bible she'd read every morning at our kitchen table for as long as I could remember. I'd finally worked up the courage to go through her things that morning. Her clothes still hung in the closet. Her perfume bottle still sat on the dresser. The house on Providence Road still smelled like her lavender lotion. But it was time. Our daughter Michelle had been asking me for months if I needed help sorting through things, but I told her I needed to do it alone. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Where are you watching this from right now, and what time is it there? Drop a comment and let me know. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps me keep sharing these stories with you. The key had a tag attached with a number written in Dorothy's handwriting, 147. Nothing else. No explanation. No letter. Just 147. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. Dorothy and I had always been transparent about our finances. We had a joint checking account at Bank of America on Sharon Road, a savings account with $47,000 in it, and our retirement accounts. I'd handled all of that since she got sick. There were no secrets between us, or so I thought. I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed we'd shared for 4 decades, and stared at that key. Dorothy had been organized to a fault. She labeled everything. She kept files for every bill, every receipt, every document. If she'd hidden a key in her Bible without telling me, there had to be a reason. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone and called Bank of America. The woman who answered was polite but couldn't help me. Mr. Williams, I'm showing your joint accounts here, but I don't see any safety deposit boxes registered to you or Mrs. Williams in our branch. I thanked her and hung up. Then I called SunTrust. Same answer. Then BB and T. Nothing. I was about to give up when I remembered that Dorothy's family had always banked at First Citizens Bank on Providence Road, just 2 miles from our house. Her father had been a customer there for 50 years before he passed in 2019. I drove over that afternoon. The March air was crisp, unseasonably cool for Charlotte. The dogwoods were just starting to bloom along the street. I walked into the bank at 2:47 p.m. I remember checking my watch. The lobby was quiet, just a few people at the teller windows. I approached the customer service desk where a young woman with a name tag that read Jessica looked up with a practiced smile. I need to inquire about a safety deposit box, I said, sliding the key across the desk. Box 147. My wife passed away 8 months ago, and I found this key in her belongings. Jessica's smile faltered slightly. She picked up the key, examined the number, and then looked at her computer screen. Her fingers moved across the keyboard. Then she stopped. Her expression changed. Let me get Mr. Patterson, our branch manager. Just one moment, please. That should have been my first warning. Mr. Patterson was a man in his mid-50s, black, wearing a navy suit that looked expensive. He had the careful, measured manner of someone who'd spent decades dealing with sensitive financial matters. He introduced himself, shook my hand, and gestured for me to follow him to a private office. The walls were glass, but he closed the door. Mr. Williams, he said, settling behind his desk. I need to verify your identity first. Can I see your driver's license? I handed it over. He examined it, compared it to something on his computer screen, and then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Mr. Williams, I'm sorry for your loss. I see here that Dorothy Ann Williams passed away on July 14th, 2025. That's correct. And you're listed as her spouse and executor of her estate? Yes. We had everything joint. I handled all the estate matters through our attorney, David Chun, over on East Boulevard. Mr. Patterson nodded slowly. He was choosing his words carefully, I could tell. Box 147 is registered to Dorothy Williams. You're not listed as an authorized accessor on the original paperwork from 2019, the year her father died. I didn't know she had a box here, I admitted. That's not uncommon, Mr. Patterson said. However, I need to tell you something, and I want you to stay calm. He paused, and in that pause, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Mr. Williams, Box 147 has been accessed 4 times since your wife's passing. The words didn't make sense at first. I sat there, staring at him, trying to process what he'd just said. That's impossible. Dorothy died in July. It's March. Are you saying someone has been accessing her safety deposit box? Yes, sir. The last access was 3 weeks ago, on February 18th, 2026. My mind was racing. Who's been accessing it? Mr. Patterson pulled up something on his screen. The other authorized accessor is listed as Raymond Williams. According to all records, he was added to the box in September 2019, 2 months after the box was opened. Raymond Williams, Dorothy's younger brother, my brother-in-law for 41 years. I sat back in the chair, feeling like I'd been punched in the chest. Raymond, Dorothy's baby brother, the one she'd always protected, always made excuses for. Raymond, who'd borrowed money from us over the years, always promising to pay it back, rarely doing so. Raymond, who'd shown up to Dorothy's funeral in a BMW I knew he couldn't afford, wearing a suit that probably cost $2,000. I need to see what's in that box, I said. Mr. Patterson shook his head. I can't let you access it, Mr. Williams. Not without proper legal authorization. You're not listed as an accessor, and since Mrs. Williams has passed, the box is part of her estate. You'll need to provide documentation from the probate court or a letter from your attorney establishing your authority to access it. I wanted to argue, but I knew he was right. I'd spent nearly 4 decades in financial services. I knew the rules. How long will that take? If your attorney submits the paperwork tomorrow, we could probably grant access by early next week. But Mr. Williams, I have to tell you something else. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. I've been in banking for 28 years. I've seen a lot of things. The pattern of access on this box concerns me. Raymond Williams accessed it on July 30th, 2025, just 16 days after your wife's funeral. Then again on October 3rd. Then December 19th. Then February 18th. Each time, he spent approximately 15 to 20 minutes in the vault. What does that mean? In my experience, it means he's removing things, possibly documents, possibly valuables. And the fact that he accessed it so soon after Mrs. Williams's death suggests he knew exactly what was in there and wanted to secure it before anyone else found out about the box. I drove home in a daze. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Raymond, the same Raymond who'd stood at Dorothy's funeral and hugged me, tears running down his face, telling me we were family forever. The same Raymond who'd helped carry her casket. The same Raymond who'd sat at our dining room table just 3 months ago for Christmas dinner, eating the ham I'd cooked, drinking my wine, acting like everything was normal. When I got home, I went straight to Dorothy's file cabinet in our home office. She'd kept everything organized in color-coded folders. I found the folder labeled Estate Documents and pulled out her will. It was straightforward. Everything came to me, and then to our daughter Michelle upon my death. There was a provision for $25,000 to go to Raymond, and another $25,000 to Dorothy's sister Patricia in Atlanta, but nothing about a safety deposit box. Nothing about any separate accounts or assets. I called David Chun. It was 4:30 p.m., but he answered. I'd known David for 15 years, since he'd helped us with our estate planning when our parents started passing away. I explained everything: the key, the box, the access records, Raymond's name. David was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Thomas, I need you to bring me that key tomorrow morning, first thing. And I need you to not confront Raymond until we know what we're dealing with. If there's something wrong here, and my gut tells me there is, we need to handle this legally and carefully. What do you think he's doing?" I don't want to speculate, but in my 20 years practicing estate law, I've seen siblings do terrible things when money is involved. The fact that he was added to that box right after Dorothy's father died raises red flags. Her father left an estate, correct? Yes, about $680,000. It was split between Dorothy, Raymond, and Patricia. They each got roughly $227,000 after taxes and estate expenses. And did Dorothy ever mention anything unusual about that inheritance process? I thought back. 2019 had been a difficult year. Dorothy's father, William Parker, had died suddenly of a heart attack in July. He'd been 84, a retired postal worker, a veteran, a deacon at Friendship Baptist Church. He'd owned his home outright in the Washington Heights neighborhood, had a pension, had been careful with money his whole life. The estate had taken about 6 months to settle. Raymond had been the executor because he'd been living with their father the last 2 years of his life, supposedly taking care of him. Dorothy handled everything with Raymond, I said slowly, remembering. She didn't want to burden me because I was dealing with a difficult client situation at work. She'd come home from meetings with Raymond and the estate attorney looking tired, sometimes frustrated, but she always said it was just the normal stress of dealing with paperwork. "Thomas, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., my office. Bring that key and documents you have related to Dorothy's father's estate." I barely slept that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind running through every interaction I'd had with Raymond over the past 7 years. Had there been signs? Had I missed something? Dorothy had always been protective of her family's privacy, sometimes to a fault. She hadn't liked when I'd questioned why Raymond needed another loan, or why he never seemed to hold a steady job, despite being 59 years old and perfectly capable. The next morning, I was at David Chun's office at 8:45 a.m. His practice was in a renovated house on East Boulevard, near Dilworth. He met me at the door with coffee already poured. We sat in his conference room, and I laid out everything. The key, the bank records Mr. Patterson had printed for me, Dorothy's will, the documentation from her father's estate that I'd found in her files. David examined everything with the methodical precision of a surgeon. After 20 minutes, he looked up at me. "Thomas, I'm going to file an emergency motion with the probate court today. We need access to that box, and we need it fast. Because here's what I'm seeing. According to these estate documents, Dorothy's father had 3 accounts at First Citizens Bank: a checking account, a savings account, and a money market account. The total distributed was $680,000, but I'm seeing transfers here that don't quite add up." He pointed to a page in the estate settlement documents. "This shows a transfer of $240,000 from William Parker's money market account to settle debts and final expenses. But the itemized expenses listed here only total $53,000. Where did the other $187,000 go?" I felt my chest tighten. Raymond was the executor. Exactly. And executors have broad authority to manage estate assets, but they're also required to account for every penny. This accounting looks legitimate on the surface, but if you dig into the numbers, there's a significant discrepancy. David tapped his pen against the table. "Thomas, I think Raymond might have stolen from his father's estate. And I think Dorothy might have found out. That safety deposit box was opened in September 2019, right in the middle of the estate settlement process. What if Dorothy discovered something and put evidence in that box? Why wouldn't she tell me? Because it was her brother. Because she was trying to handle it privately. Because she was hoping to resolve it within the family before it became a legal issue. David's expression was sympathetic. I've seen it 100 times, Thomas. Family members discover theft or fraud by another family member, and instead of going to the police, they try to handle it quietly to avoid scandal or public shame. It's especially common in tight-knit communities where reputation matters. Dorothy had grown up in the church. Her father had been respected in the community. The idea of publicly accusing her own brother of theft would have devastated her. So what do? We get into that box. We see what she left there. And then we decide how to proceed. But Thomas, I need to prepare you for what we might find. If Dorothy documented Raymond's theft and then died without acting on it, and if Raymond has been accessing that box since her death, he might have already removed the evidence. The emergency motion was filed that afternoon. Because I was Dorothy's spouse and executor, and because there was documented unauthorized access to the box after her death, the judge granted a hearing for Friday morning, just 2 days away. In the meantime, David filed a motion to freeze any further access to Box 147 pending the hearing. By Thursday afternoon, the bank had been notified that Raymond Williams was temporarily prohibited from accessing the box. I wondered if Raymond knew yet. I wondered if he'd tried to access the box and been turned away. Part of me wanted to call him, to confront him, to demand answers. But David had been clear. Don't tip him off. If he knows we're coming, he'll have time to prepare, maybe destroy evidence, maybe create false documentation. We need the element of surprise. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. I put on my navy suit, the same one I'd worn to Dorothy's funeral. David met me at the courthouse on East Trade Street at 8:30 a.m. The hearing was brief. The judge, a black woman in her 60s named Judge Harrison, reviewed the documentation, asked me a few questions about my relationship to Dorothy and my role as executor, and then granted me full access to Box 147, effective immediately. We drove straight to First Citizens Bank. Mr. Patterson was waiting for us. He'd been notified by the court of the judge's order. Mr. Williams, Mr. Chun, follow me, please. He led us through the lobby, past the teller windows, to a secure door that required a key card. The vault area was quiet, temperature controlled, lined with small metal doors on both walls. Mr. Patterson used his master key in combination with the key I'd found in Dorothy's Bible. Box 147 was located near the bottom row on the left side. He pulled out the long metal drawer and carried it to a private viewing room. Take all the time you need, he said, and closed the door behind him. The box was about 3 feet long, 6 inches wide, and 6 inches deep. Inside were manila folders, stacked neatly. Dorothy's handwriting was on each tab. I pulled out the first folder with shaking hands. The tab read, Dad's Estate, Discrepancies. Inside were bank statements, highlighted and annotated in Dorothy's careful handwriting. Copies of checks written from her father's accounts in the months before his death. Withdrawal slips. Transfer records. She documented everything with dates and amounts. And as I read through page after page, a picture emerged that made me sick to my stomach. Raymond had been stealing from their father for at least 3 years before William Parker died. Small amounts at first. $500 here, $1,000 there. Checks written to cash. But in the 6 months before William's death, the amounts had increased dramatically. $5,000, $10,000, $15,000. Dorothy had highlighted a transfer on March 15th, 2019, 4 months before William died. $47,000 from his money market account to an account at a different bank. Next to it, in Dorothy's handwriting, Raymond opened this account at BB&T in Dad's name without Dad knowing. Confirmed with BB&T manager that signature on opening docs doesn't match Dad's signature on file with Social Security. I felt David stiffen beside me. That's financial exploitation of an elderly person. That's not just theft. That's a felony in North Carolina. We kept reading. There were more folders. Forged checks. False power of attorney. Missing assets. Dorothy had been building a case, documenting everything. There were photographs of jewelry that should have been in William's estate but weren't. A copy of a life insurance policy for $100,000. That listed Raymond as the beneficiary, with a note from Dorothy. Dad told me in 2018 his life insurance beneficiary was split between all three of us. This was changed in March 2019. Dad's signature looks wrong. The most devastating folder was labeled Confrontation. Inside was a single document, a letter dated November 3, 2019, written in Dorothy's handwriting but never sent. It was addressed to Raymond. It read, "Raymond, I know what you did. I know what you've been doing to Dad's money. I've documented everything. I'm giving you one chance to make this right. Return the money you stole. All of it. I've calculated it at $340,000. If you return it within 30 days and split it properly between the three of us, I won't go to the police. But if you don't, I will turn over everything I have to the district attorney. You have until December 3rd, 2019. This is not negotiable. You're my brother and I love you, but I will not let you steal from our father's memory or from Patricia and me. Dorothy. December 3rd, 2019. I tried to remember what had happened around that time. That was 7 years ago. I'd been busy at work, dealing with year-end client reviews. Dorothy had seemed stressed. I remembered that. She'd been quieter than usual. And Raymond, I don't think I'd seen him much in early December that year. Actually, I don't think he'd come to Christmas that year. Dorothy had made some excuse about him being sick. He didn't return the money, David said quietly. And she didn't go to the police. Why not? David pointed to another document in the folder. It was a medical record, dated January 15th, 2020. Dorothy's first oncology appointment. Pancreatic cancer, stage 3. She got sick, David said. She found out she was sick, and suddenly prosecuting her brother wasn't the priority anymore. Surviving was. I sat in that small viewing room for a long time, holding my wife's documented evidence of her brother's betrayal. She'd carried this burden alone. She'd discovered that her brother had systematically robbed their father, had forged documents, had manipulated a dying man's finances, and then had played executor of the estate he'd already looted. And she'd been planning to do something about it until cancer derailed everything. The timeline was clear now. Dorothy had opened this safety deposit box in September 2019, right when she'd started discovering the discrepancies. She'd spent 2 months investigating, gathering evidence, documenting everything with the thoroughness she brought to everything in her life. She'd confronted Raymond privately in early November, giving him a deadline. When he didn't comply, she'd planned to go to the authorities in December. But then she got sick in January 2020, and her priorities shifted to treatment, to spending time with our daughter, to fighting for her life. And Raymond, knowing she had this evidence but was too sick to use it, had simply waited. He'd visited her in the hospital, I remembered now. He'd sent flowers. He'd called to check on her. He'd played the concerned brother while knowing he'd stolen from his own father and betrayed his sister. Then, after she died, he'd accessed this box 4 times. Why? The answer was in the last folder. It was labeled Property Deed, Washington Heights House. Inside was a deed to William Parker's house. The house in Washington Heights where Raymond had been living when William died, where Raymond still lived now. The house that was supposed to have been sold as part of the estate, with proceeds split 3 ways. According to the estate documents I'd seen, The house had been valued at $385,000 and sold in December 2019 for $380,000. But this deed told a different story. The house had never been sold to an outside buyer. It had been transferred to Raymond Williams on December 10, 2019 for $1. A family transfer. Raymond had transferred the house to himself using his authority as executor, claimed it had been sold to a third party, and pocketed the money that should have been split between the three siblings. David let out a low whistle. He didn't just steal from the estate. He stole the estate, the money, the assets, and the house. And then he filed fraudulent documents claiming everything had been properly distributed. I thought about how I'd helped Dorothy through that time, how she'd seemed relieved when the estate was settled in early 2020, how she'd said she was glad it was over, glad she didn't have to deal with Raymond anymore, glad she could focus on her treatment. I'd thought she meant the normal stress of dealing with a parent's estate. I hadn't known she meant the stress of discovering her brother was a thief and deciding whether to destroy him publicly or protect the family reputation. She'd chosen to protect the family. She'd hidden the evidence in this box, maybe hoping she'd beat the cancer and have the strength to deal with it later. Maybe hoping Raymond would develop a conscience. Maybe just too tired and sick to fight. But she'd kept the evidence. She'd kept it safe. And she'd hidden the key where she knew I'd eventually find it. In her Bible. In the Psalms, the prayers she'd turned to for comfort her entire life. What do I do now? I asked David. He was organizing the documents, photographing each page with his phone. Now we have a decision to make. We can go to the police with this. Financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, fraud, theft, filing false estate documents. Raymond is looking at serious felony charges. He could go to prison for years. Or we handle this privately. We confront him, we demand restitution. We force him to make things right without involved enforcement. David looked at me carefully. I need to tell you that as an attorney, I'm ethically obligated to report certain crimes. But as your attorney, I also need to follow your wishes regarding how aggressive you want to be. This is your family. This was your wife's family. She had this evidence and chose not to use it, at least not immediately. I need to know what you want to do. I thought about Dorothy, about the letter she'd written but never sent, about how she'd given Raymond a chance to make it right, about how she'd valued family, valued privacy, valued the church community where her father had been a respected elder. But I also thought about how Raymond had spit on that grace by accessing this box after she died, probably to see if she'd documented anything else, probably to make sure he was safe. He'd gambled that I'd never find the key. He'd gambled wrong. I want to confront him first, I said, face to face. I want to give him the same chance Dorothy gave him. One chance to make this right. If he refuses, then we go to the police with everything. David nodded. Then we need to be strategic. We need to catch him off guard, document everything, and make sure we're protected legally. I'm going to draft a demand letter laying out everything we know and what we're demanding. Full restitution of $340,000 plus the house, which is probably worth $450,000 now given the Charlotte real estate market over the past 6 years. We're talking about nearly $800,000 in total theft. We spent the rest of Friday afternoon in David's office, going through every document, building a timeline, calculating exact amounts. David called in his paralegal, and together they created a comprehensive report. By 6 p.m., we had a 47-page document detailing every transaction, every forged signature, every fraudulent claim. It was devastating. It was complete. It was irrefutable. On Saturday morning, David drafted the demand letter. It was formal, legal, and absolutely clear. Raymond had 7 days to respond with a plan for full restitution, or we would turn over all evidence to the Mecklenburg County District Attorney's Office and file a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds and property. How do we deliver this? I asked. In person, Monday morning. We show up at his house, we hand him the letter, and we tell him he has until 5 p.m. next Monday to respond. That gives him 7 days. Not negotiable, no extensions, no bargaining. He pays back every penny, or he faces criminal prosecution. I didn't sleep well that weekend. I kept thinking about Dorothy, about how she'd carried this knowledge alone through her sickness, about how many times Raymond had visited her in the hospital, knowing what he'd done, about how he'd cried at her funeral, about how he'd hugged me and told me we were family. Monday morning came cold and clear. March in Charlotte can be unpredictable, but that day was beautiful. Temperature in the mid-60s, sun bright. David and I drove to the Washington Heights neighborhood at 10 a.m., the house at 4721. Oaklawn Avenue was a modest ranch-style home, well-maintained, probably built in the 1960s. William Parker had bought it in 1972 for $28,000 and paid it off by 1987. It should have been part of his children's inheritance. Instead, Raymond lived there alone, having stolen it from his sisters. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. I could hear a TV inside. Finally, the door opened, and Raymond stood there in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking like he'd just woken up, despite it being 10 in the morning. He saw me and smiled, that easy smile I'd seen 1,000 times. "Thomas, man, what are you doing here? Everything okay?" Then he noticed David standing behind me with a briefcase. His smile faltered slightly. "Who's this?" "Raymond, this is David Chun, my attorney. We need to talk. Can we come in?" His expression shifted, wariness creeping in. "What's this about?" "Box 147 at First Citizens Bank, your father's estate, and the $340,000 you stole." The color drained from his face. For a moment, I thought he might close the door on us, but instead he stepped back and let us in. The house looked the same as I remembered from visits when William was alive. The furniture, the pictures on the walls, even the smell was the same. Raymond had changed nothing, just moved in and lived in his father's house as if he'd earned it honestly. We sat in the living room. David pulled out a folder, the demand letter on top. "Mr. Williams, I'm David Chun, and I represent Thomas Williams as executor of Dorothy Williams's estate. We've obtained access to safety deposit box 147 at First Citizens Bank, which contained extensive documentation of financial crimes you committed against your father, William Parker, between 2016 and 2019, and subsequent fraud in the administration of his estate." Raymond was shaking his head before David finished. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," I said, and my voice was steady. I'd spent 62 years learning patience. I'd learned in my career that anger clouds judgment, that emotion weakens your position. Dorothy documented everything. Every forged check, every unauthorized transfer, every false document you filed. She gave you a chance to make it right in November 2019. You didn't take it. Then she got sick, and you thought you were safe. You thought she'd never act on it. And if she died, the evidence would die with her. But then you made a mistake, David continued. You accessed that safety deposit box 4 times after her death. That's when the bank manager noticed the unusual activity and flagged it. That's how Thomas found out about the box. That's how we got a court order to access it. And now we have everything Dorothy had, plus evidence that you continued to try to access the box after her death. Probably to remove evidence. Raymond's hands were trembling. He tried to speak, but couldn't seem to form words. I pulled out a copy of one of the documents from the box. It was a bank statement from May 2019 showing a $15,000 withdrawal from William's account with a forged signature. Dad was in the hospital that week, I said. I checked the medical records. He had pneumonia, He was on oxygen. He couldn't have gone to the bank to withdraw $15,000 in cash. But someone who had access to his accounts did. Someone who could forge his signature well enough to fool a teller who didn't look too carefully. "Here's what's going to happen," David said, sliding the demand letter across the coffee table. "You're going to read this letter. It details every crime we can prove. Financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, fraud, filing false documents with the probate court. The total amount stolen is $340,000 in liquid assets, plus this house, which is currently valued at approximately $450,000. You have 7 days to provide a written response detailing how you intend to make full restitution. If you fail to respond, or if your response is inadequate, we will turn over all evidence to the district attorney's office and file a civil lawsuit to recover all stolen assets." Raymond finally found his voice. "You can't prove any of this. Those documents could be faked. Dorothy could have been confused. She was sick." "Don't." The word came out harder than I'd intended. "Don't you dare use her sickness as an excuse. Dorothy's mind was sharp right up until the last month of her life. She documented this in 2019, before she even knew she was sick. And we have the original documents, Raymond, bank records, dated photographs, copies of checks with your handwriting on the forged signatures, testimony from the BB&T manager about the account you opened in Dad's name. We have receipts showing you spent money from Dad's accounts on a BMW you bought in April 2019, the same one sitting in your driveway right now." He slumped back in the chair, his face gray. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed some time. I had debts. I had problems. I was going to fix it. You had 7 years," I said. "Dorothy gave you a chance in 2019. You had 7 years to make it right. You didn't. You just kept living in this house that doesn't belong to you, driving that car you bought with stolen money, going on with your life while Dorothy died knowing her brother was a thief." David stood up. 7 days. Mr. Williams. The letter explains everything. I'd suggest you get an attorney, because you're going to need one either way. Either you work with us on restitution, or you work with a criminal defense attorney to try to stay out of prison. Your choice." We walked out. Raymond sat frozen in that chair, the letter on the coffee table in front of him, his world crumbling around him. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. I felt sad for Dorothy, for the burden she'd carried. I felt sad for William Parker, who'd worked hard his entire life and trusted his son to care for him in his final years, only to be robbed blind. But I also felt a strange sense of peace. Dorothy had hidden that key for a reason. She'd wanted the truth to come out eventually. She'd trusted that I'd find it, that I'd know what to do with it. The days that followed were tense. I didn't hear from Raymond directly, but on Wednesday, David received a call from an attorney named Marcus Brown, who identified himself as Raymond's counsel. "My client is prepared to discuss settlement terms," Brown said. We met on Friday, 5 days after our confrontation, in David's conference room. Raymond showed up with Marcus Brown, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Raymond looked like he hadn't slept in days. Good. Marcus Brown laid out their position. "My client acknowledges there may have been some irregularities in the handling of William Parker's estate. However, he disputes the total amount claimed. He's prepared to offer $150,000 in settlement of all claims, paid over 3 years, in exchange for Thomas Williams agreeing not to pursue criminal charges or civil litigation." David didn't even blink. "No, your client stole $340,000 in liquid assets, plus a house worth $450,000. We're not negotiating down to $150,000 paid over 3 years. Full restitution immediately, or we go to the DEA on Monday morning. My client doesn't have access to that kind of money." "Then he sells the house," I said. The house he stole. He sells it. He pays back every penny he took from his father's estate. And he splits what's left with Patricia and me the way it should have been done in 2020. Or he goes to prison. Those are the options. Raymond finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't have anywhere else to go. You should have thought of that before you robbed your father, I said. Before you forged his signature while he was dying. Before you played executor and looted the estate. Before you lied to your sisters and kept lying for 7 years. Marcus Brown tried several more negotiation tactics. He talked about the difficulty of prosecution, the ambiguity of some of the evidence, the cost of litigation. David shot down every argument with calm, detailed responses. He'd been a litigator for 20 years. He knew when he held all the cards. Finally, after 2 hours, Marcus Brown asked for a private consultation with his client. They came back 10 minutes later. Raymond looked defeated, broken. He'll sell the house, Marcus Brown said. But he needs 90 days to arrange the sale and settle his affairs. And he's asking that you agree not to pursue criminal charges if he makes full restitution. David looked at me. This was my decision. I thought about Dorothy's letter, the one she'd written but never sent. She'd given Raymond a chance to make it right privately. She'd offered him mercy even when he didn't deserve it. She'd valued family, even family that betrayed her. 60 days to complete the sale, I said. Not 90. The house goes on the market this week, and he accepts the first reasonable offer. When the sale closes, all proceeds go into an escrow account that David manages. The money gets distributed according to how it should have been in 2020. 1/3 to Patricia, 1/3 to me on behalf of Dorothy's estate, and Raymond keeps whatever his legitimate 1/3 share would have been after all stolen funds are repaid. As for criminal charges, if he complies fully and immediately with every term, I won't go to the day. But if he misses a single deadline, if he tries to hide any assets, if he does anything other than full cooperation, I turn over everything and he can take his chances with a jury. Marcus Brown nodded. We can agree to those terms. The paperwork was drawn up that afternoon. Raymond signed it with shaking hands. The house went on the market the following Tuesday, listed at $449,000. In Charlotte's hot real estate market, it sold in 11 days for $455,000. Raymond moved out to an apartment in University City, taking only his personal belongings. The closing was on May 2nd, 2026, exactly 58 days after our confrontation. When the dust settled, after all the accounting was done, Patricia received $267,000. Her proper share of the inheritance she should have gotten in 2020 plus interest. I received the same on behalf of Dorothy's estate, which would go to our daughter Michelle. Raymond was left with $89,000 from his share after the stolen amounts were repaid. Barely enough for a down payment on a modest home. Nowhere near enough to maintain the lifestyle he'd been living on stolen money. I called Patricia in Atlanta and explained everything. She'd had no idea. She cried when she heard what Raymond had done to their father, what Dorothy had discovered and carried alone. I wish she'd told me, Patricia said. I would have helped her. She didn't have to handle this alone. She was protecting the family, I said. She was hoping Raymond would do the right thing. She gave him a chance. He didn't deserve it. No, he didn't. But that was Dorothy. She believed in redemption. She believed people could change. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Are you going to tell Michelle? I'd been thinking about that. Michelle was 39, living in Denver with her husband and 2 kids. She'd adored her Uncle Raymond growing up. Finding out he'd robbed her grandfather and betrayed her mother would devastate her, but she also deserved the truth. Yes, I said. She needs to know what her mother did, how strong she was, how she documented everything, even while she was sick. She needs to know that Dorothy fought for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it was her own brother. I told Michelle on a Sunday afternoon video call. I watched her face go through shock, disbelief, anger, and finally a kind of sad understanding. Mom always protected everyone, Michelle said, wiping tears. She always tried to see the best in people. I can't believe Uncle Raymond did that to Grandpa. I can't believe he let Mom die knowing what he'd done. Your mother was stronger than anyone knew, I said. She was sick, she was fighting cancer, and she still took the time to document everything, to gather evidence, to build a case. She left that key for me to find because she knew eventually the truth needed to come out. She trusted me to handle it. You did right by her, Dad. Those words meant more than the money, more than the satisfaction of holding Raymond accountable. Dorothy had carried her burden alone, but she'd left me the tools to finish what she'd started. She'd hidden the key in her Bible, in the pages she turned to for strength and guidance. She'd known I'd find it when the time was right. Raymond and I haven't spoken since the closing. I see him occasionally around Charlotte, once at the grocery store on Park Road, once at a gas station on Providence. He looks away. He doesn't try to speak to me. His life is smaller now, constrained by the consequences of his choices. He lost the house. He lost the money. He lost his family's trust and respect. That's not my revenge. That's karma. That's the natural consequence of spending years lying, stealing, and betraying the people who loved you. I visit Dorothy's grave every Sunday after church at Forest Lawn East Cemetery on Monroe Road. I bring flowers, usually the lavender roses she loved. I sit on the bench near her headstone and tell her about my week, about Michelle and the grandkids, about the house, about everything. And now I can tell her that I found the key, that I opened the box, that I understood what she'd been carrying, and that I made sure the truth came out the way she would have wanted, with dignity, with justice, but also with mercy. Dorothy Ann Parker Williams believed in three things above all else: family, faith, and fairness. Raymond violated all three. But even in documenting his crimes, even in building a case against him, Dorothy gave him a chance to make it right. That's who she was. That's the woman I loved for 41 years. That's the legacy she left behind, not just for Michelle, but for everyone who knew her. I learned something through all of this that I want to share with you, wherever you're watching this from tonight. Patience is power. Dignity is strength. When someone wrongs you, especially when it's family, the impulse is to react immediately, to lash out, to seek revenge. But Dorothy taught me, even after she was gone, that real power comes from gathering the facts, documenting the truth, and acting strategically rather than emotionally. She could have confronted Raymond publicly in 2019. She could have called the police immediately. Instead, she gave him a chance to do the right thing. When he didn't, she preserved the evidence and trusted that eventually, justice would be served. That's not weakness. That's wisdom. That's the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge is immediate and emotional. Justice is patient and factual. Dorothy built a case with bank statements, documented transactions, and irrefutable evidence. When the time came, there was no argument, no he said, she said, just facts. That's power. And karma isn't something you create. Karma is simply the natural consequence of your choices catching up with you. Raymond chose to steal from his dying father. He chose to forge signatures and file false documents. He chose to betray his sisters and live off stolen money for 7 years. I didn't destroy Raymond's life. His own choices did that. I just made sure the truth came to light. So, if you're dealing with betrayal, especially from someone close to you, I want to encourage you to take your time, gather your facts, document everything. Act from a place of principle, not emotion. Give people a chance to make things right, because that's what grace looks like. But if they refuse that chance, don't be afraid to pursue justice. You're not being vindictive. You're being responsible. You're honoring the truth. Thank you for watching my story today. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there who might be dealing with something similar. If this resonated with you, please leave a comment and let me know. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Take care of yourselves, protect your family, and remember, the truth always has a way of coming out eventually. You just have to be patient enough to let it. God bless you all.